My daughter and her husband poisoned our coffee the morning they drove us to the lake. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I just remember thinking the drive felt strange, the way Irene kept checking the rearview mirror, and the way my son-in-law Bernard kept drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Even after the music stopped, I thought they were nervous about something. I thought maybe they'd had a fight. 63 years on this earth, and I still didn't know how to read the people sleeping under my roof. My name is Clifford Haynes. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers before I retired to a 4-bedroom house outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, with my wife Beverly. We have a lake behind us. We have a dock I built with my own hands, treated lumber, stainless hardware, the whole thing rated to hold 1,200 pounds. I know exactly how much weight it can take. I know the tensile strength of every bolt I drove into that wood. What I didn't know was that my own daughter had been calculating the weight of my life insurance policy for the better part of 2 years. This happened 11 days ago. I'm recording this from a room that nobody knows I'm sitting in. My leg is wrapped. My wife is asleep on the cot behind me. And if you are watching this, then what I'm about to tell you is already in the hands of the Blount County Sheriff's Department. It started the way most catastrophic failures start, not with a crack, with a groan you ignore because the structure has held so far. Our daughter Irene had been back in our lives for about 8 months by the time this happened. Before that, we hadn't seen her in almost 4 years. She called Beverly out of the blue one February evening, crying, saying she'd made mistakes, saying Bernard had lost his job, saying they needed to start over. Beverly wept. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching my wife put her hand over her heart, the way she does when she's about to say yes to something she should think harder about. I should have said something. Irene was 41 years old. She was our second child, the one who had always been sharper than she needed to be. Not sharp like smart, sharp like something that cuts if you hold it wrong. She had a gift for reading a room and arranging herself to fit what the room wanted. When Beverly wanted warmth, Irene was warm. When I wanted straightforward, she was direct. I had mistaken this for character. For years I thought it was just maturity. Bernard was harder to read. He had the kind of blankness that some people take for calm. He'd worked in commercial real estate in Atlanta, and he spoke in terms of leverage and upside potential the way other men talk about the weather. I never fully relaxed around him. But Irene loved him, or I thought she did. You understand things differently after you have heard 2 people whispering about the current value of your life insurance policy while you are lying in the dark 20 feet below them, still alive, trying not to breathe too loud. They moved into the guest wing in March. They said it was temporary. Irene said she was applying for positions at a firm in Knoxville. Bernard said he had a few prospects. Beverly made pot roast and set the table with the good napkins. She wanted to believe that her daughter had come home. The first thing I noticed was the questions. Not questions about us, about our health, or what we've been doing, but questions about the structure of things. How much did the property tax run on the lake house? Had we refinanced? Were we still with the same financial advisor? I work in infrastructure. I know load-bearing questions when I hear them, and I know the difference between curiosity and reconnaissance. I said something to Beverly about it one night in April. She told me I was being uncharitable. I let it go. The second thing I noticed was our will. I had noticed Irene going into my study 3 times in a single week. The third time I walked in after she'd left, the drawer to the filing cabinet was not completely closed. The manila folder with our estate documents was slightly forward from where I keep it. I am an engineer. I put things back in the same place. Always. I didn't say anything. I just took photographs of everything in that folder with my phone and emailed them to my attorney, a man named Ray Sutton, out of downtown Knoxville. I told Ray to keep them in case I ever needed them. I didn't tell him why. I didn't fully know why myself. I just felt a weight settling in the house that I couldn't name. In hindsight, that email may have saved everything. The lake trip was Irene's idea. She said it was for Beverly's birthday. Beverly turned 61 in August and had been saying for years that she wanted to spend it on the water somewhere quiet. Irene planned the whole thing. She found a cabin up near Norris Lake, about an hour and a half from us, isolated, no close neighbors. She booked it for a long weekend. She made it sound like the kind of gift only a loving daughter would give. The morning we left, she made coffee for everyone. A French press, dark roast, the kind Beverly likes. I'd drunk about a third of mine when I started feeling strange. Not sick, just slow, like my thoughts were arriving a second or two after they were supposed to. I set the cup down without finishing it. Beverly drank all of hers. I watched her get quieter in the car. More still. I thought she was just tired. By the time we reached the cabin, my wife's eyes had a quality I didn't like. She wasn't herself. She laughed at the wrong moments, and then stopped mid-sentence. She was sedated. I knew it the way I'd known structural things, my whole life, not from proof, but from the wrongness of the angle. I didn't say anything in front of them. Irene unpacked while Bernard carried bags in from the car. I walked Beverly to the bedroom and got her lying down. I told her to rest. She was asleep in under a minute. I closed the door and stood in the hallway, and I thought very carefully about what I knew and what I didn't know. Then I walked out to the dock because I needed to think where they couldn't see my face. Bernard came out after me about 20 minutes later. He stood at the far end of the dock and lit a cigarette. He had never smoked in front of us before. That was when I understood that the performance was ending. He said he wanted to talk to me about the property. He said Irene had been worrying, that the market was difficult, that they were under real pressure. He started talking about a home equity line of credit. He said there were options we hadn't fully explored. I kept my face neutral, and I nodded, and I watched his hands, and I watched where he positioned himself between me and the path back to the cabin. When he moved, I was already moving. He was taller than me by 4 inches and about 20 years younger, but I spent 31 years climbing into construction sites and crawling through conduit tunnels and working in conditions that required you to know exactly what your body could do under pressure. I stepped to the left when he reached for my shoulder. He got my jacket instead. The momentum pulled him forward. His right heel caught the gap between the dock planks, and I felt the whole structure shudder when he went down. He went into the water sideways, not a clean fall. It was ugly and loud, and I didn't wait to watch him surface. I ran, not toward the cabin, away from it, into the tree line at the north side of the property. The way you run when you do not know how many people you are running from. I made it about 40 yards before my knee gave out, an old injury from a job site in '09 that never healed right. I went down in the brush and lay there breathing, listening to Bernard shouting my name from somewhere back toward the water. His voice had lost everything it pretended to be. It was just animal panic. Irene came out the back door of the cabin. I could see her through the brush from maybe 60 yards out. She was holding her phone to her ear, and she wasn't calling for help. I know what calling for help looks like. She was giving a report. That was when I understood that there was a third person. I lay in the leaves with my bad knee throbbing, and I counted what I had. I had my wallet. I had my phone with about 60% battery. I had my keys, which were useless because the car was in the driveway and I couldn't get to it. I had the knowledge that my wife was sedated in a cabin with 2 people who had just tried to put me in a lake, and I had 23 years of knowing this piece of shoreline well enough to navigate it in the dark. I also had Beverly's medical history memorized, and I knew that whatever they put in that coffee, she needed to sleep it off in a stable position, and she would need water when she came around, and she was not going to die from it alone in a locked bedroom. That was the thought I held on to. She is not going to die from this alone. I turned off the screen brightness on my phone to save the battery, and I sent one text to Ray Sutton. I told him where we were, that Beverly had been drugged, and that I believed Irene and Bernard intended to report an accident on the water. I told him to call the county sheriff. Then I turned off mobile data and saved the battery, and I moved into the trees. The property on the north side of the Norris Lake parcel dropped off into a shallow creek that ran under the service road. I had mapped it in my head on the drive up, the way I always map routes when I enter unfamiliar terrain. Old habit. I moved along the creek bed. My knee was burning. I kept my weight on the left side, and I moved slow, and I breathed through my nose. I could hear them searching. Bernard had gotten out of the lake, and he was calling my name in that voice men use when they're trying to sound calm and aren't. I heard Irene at one point, her voice lower, not searching, directing. She told him to check the road. She told him they needed to find me before dark. She said if he gets to a phone, everything falls apart. I stopped moving. I pressed my back against a birch tree and I listened to my daughter's voice carry across the water, and I let myself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. The full weight of what she was. What she had always been. The little girl who used to run into my arms when I came home from a job site, whose college education I had paid for, whose wedding I had walked her down the aisle for. I let myself feel every year of that, and then I put it somewhere and closed the door on it. An engineer doesn't grieve a compromised structure while he's still standing in it. You grieve after. You rebuild or you don't. But first you get out. I moved. The service road came out about half a mile north of the cabin driveway. I got to it just as the lights started going. My phone showed 2 bars. I called Ray directly this time. He answered on the second ring. "Ray," I said, "I need you to listen very carefully." He said he'd gotten my text and had already called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I told him that wasn't going to be enough. I told him what had happened on the dock. I told him what Irene had said in the trees. I told him about the coffee and Beverly. Ray is not a man who frightens easily. He is 67 years old and he has practiced estate law in Tennessee for 35 years. But I heard something change in his breathing when I finished talking. He said, "Clifford, what are they planning to claim?" I said, "I think they're planning to claim I fell in." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The policy, the policy, the policy." Beverly and I had a joint life insurance policy that we had taken out 12 years ago when we refinanced the house. $2 million each. Standard accidental death rider. If I died in a drowning accident, Irene stood to receive her share of the estate plus the insurance payout immediately, bypassing probate on the liquid assets because of the way the policy was structured. Ray had drafted that structure. He knew every line of it. He said, "I'm calling the sheriff directly right now. Don't go back to the cabin." I told him I had to go back. Beverly was in there. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Stay on the phone with me." I didn't go in through the front. The cabin had a root cellar entrance on the east side, an old door flush with the ground of the rental listing had mentioned in the property description. I had read the listing carefully before we left because that is how I approach anything I'm going to spend time inside. The door wasn't locked from outside. They hadn't thought about it. I got in. The inside of the cellar smelled like old wood and river damp. There was a pull-string light that worked. I found the interior stairs and came up through a door in the kitchen pantry. Behind the shelving unit, I stood in the dark between the shelves and the wall, and I listened to the house. I could hear Bernard on the front porch, on the phone. His voice was tight, controlled. He was talking to someone who was not the sheriff. He was saying that things had gotten complicated. He was saying there had been an unexpected problem and they needed to adjust the timeline. That word, timeline, landed on me like a dropped beam. Irene was in the main room. I could hear her moving, the sound of her footsteps on the hardwood, the quiet click of the bedroom door. She was checking on Beverly, confirming she was still out. I moved through the kitchen to the hallway. The bedroom door was cracked open. I could see a slice of Beverly lying on her side on the bed, her chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of the drug sleep. Irene was standing over her. She had her phone out and she was looking at something on the screen. Her face in the glow of the phone was a face I recognized but could no longer place. It belonged to someone I had spent 40 years believing I knew. She was reading an insurance document. I pushed the door open. She spun around and her face went through about 4 different expressions in less than a second before it settled on the one she had been trained to use. Confusion, concern, the soft voice. "Daddy, you're okay, we were so worried. Bernard is looking for you." She stepped toward me and I watched her hands and I watched her eyes and I felt the full, cold clarity of a man who has already passed through fear and come out the other side. I said, "Stop." She stopped. I said, "Step away from your mother." She did something then that I have thought about every night since. She looked at me, and for just a moment, the performance broke. Not into remorse, into calculation. She was figuring out how much I knew. She was measuring the distance between us and the door and the window and the probability of each. That was when I knew there was nothing left to save. I put myself between her and Beverly, and I told her that Ray Sutton had already called the sheriff and that they were on their way. I told her I knew about the coffee. I told her I knew about the insurance documents in my filing cabinet. I told her I knew she had been in contact with someone else, someone who was helping her plan this, because nobody adjusts a timeline alone. Her face changed again. This time it went somewhere I hadn't seen before. She said, "You don't understand what we're in." I said, "Then tell me." And she did. Not everything, but enough. Bernard had borrowed money from a private lender, a man she called by first name only, the kind of lender who does not file paperwork with any state authority and does not send collection letters. They were in for $400,000, accumulated over 3 years of bad investment decisions and a commercial real estate market that had gone sideways in Atlanta. The interest had been compounding at a rate that Ray would later describe to me as criminal in both the metaphorical and literal sense. They had been given a deadline. The lender had made clear what would happen if the deadline passed without payment. She said, "We didn't have a choice. I have been a father for 41 years. I know what it feels like to love someone past the point of reason. I know what it costs. But there is a line between the love that survives anything and the love that has been so thoroughly hollowed out by betrayal that what remains is only the shape of it." I was standing on the other side of that line, and I could feel the distance. I said, "You had a choice. You made it." The sheriffs arrived 12 minutes later. 2 units, because Ray had told them to take it seriously. Deputy first on scene was a woman named Hutchins, who had the immediate situational read of someone who has been in rooms with bad information before. She walked in, looked at Beverly on the bed, looked at Irene standing by the window, looked at me leaning against the doorframe with my bad knee and my dirty jacket, and she did not ask the wrong questions first. She asked Beverly's condition, and she asked if medical was needed, and she called it in while her partner located Bernard, who was still on the front porch and who made the mistake of attempting to walk past the deputy toward the tree line. He did not get far. What happened in the following hours is something I am still reconstructing in pieces. Blount County Sheriff's detectives came out from Knoxville. Ray arrived in person around 11 at night, which tells you something about Ray Sutton. Beverly was taken to the hospital in Maynardville, and I sat with her until 2 in the morning when the doctor told me the sedative levels were consistent with a prescription sleep aid, administered at a dose approximately 3 times the therapeutic limit, and that she was going to be fine. I sat in the waiting room chair, and I put my face in my hands, and I allowed myself to do what I had not been able to do in the trees or on the service road or in that dark kitchen pantry behind the shelving unit. I allowed myself to feel the size of what had almost happened. They had planned to sedate Beverly so she would be incapacitated but alive, an alibi. Bernard would push me from the dock. Irene would report that I had been drinking, which I don't do, but a toxicology report on a body pulled from a lake wouldn't necessarily distinguish between alcohol and a sedative introduced to the body hours earlier through a shared coffee. The death would be ruled accidental. Beverly would wake up in a cabin next to her grief. The insurance claim would process within 30 to 60 days. The lender would be paid. Whatever remained would be theirs. They had run the numbers. They had built a model. They had treated the life of a 63-year-old man who had never done anything to them, but loved them and support them, and open his home to them, like a variable in a spreadsheet. The third person Irene had been on the phone with turned out to be the private lender himself, a man with a prior federal conviction for wire fraud, who had been operating in the Southeast for years. Ray's contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that the lender had been under investigation for 18 months, and that Irene's phone records, subpoenaed 72 hours after the incident, contained communications that were, in the prosecutor's language, extremely useful to an ongoing investigation. Irene and Bernard were arrested the morning after the incident. They were charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and criminal administration of a controlled substance. They are being held without bail pending the preliminary hearing. I have not spoken to my daughter since that bedroom. Beverly was discharged 4 days after admission. We drove back to Knoxville in Ray's car, because ours was still at the cabin, and neither of us wanted to be inside it for a while. She slept most of the way. When she woke up outside of Knoxville, she looked out the window for a long time. Then she said, "I kept thinking about the pot roast." I looked at her. She said, "I made pot roast when they moved in. I was so happy." She didn't say anything else, and I didn't either. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be witnessed. We have been staying with my brother and his wife in Farragut for the past week and a half. Beverly has been seeing a therapist at a practice downtown that Ray recommended. I have been seeing a different kind of therapist, the kind that involves sitting on my brother's back porch with a cup of coffee I made myself and watching the light change over the ridge. My grandson, Irene's son from her first marriage, is 12 years old and lives with his father outside of Nashville. His name is Owen. I have spoken to him on the phone twice since this happened. His father is a decent man who didn't deserve what Irene put him through when they divorced, and who has raised Owen with considerably more care than the situation required of him. Owen knows something happened. He doesn't know the shape of it yet. He will, when he's ready, and I will be the one to tell him, carefully and honestly, the way you tell someone a hard truth when you love them enough to give it to them straight. We have updated the estate documents. Ray drafted a trust with Owen as the sole beneficiary to be administered until he turns 25. The house in Knoxville, the investment accounts, the lake property which I have not been back to and don't intend to return to, all of it goes to him. I wrote Owen a letter to be included with the trust documents, a letter that will be held by Ray until Owen is old enough to understand it. In the letter, I told him that his grandmother and I thought about him in that cabin when everything was at its worst, that the thought of him was part of what moved my legs back toward the house. I am not a sentimental man. I don't say things I don't mean. Beverly asked me last night whether I was angry. I told her I was, and that it was a particular kind of anger, the kind that sits low and doesn't burn hot, the kind that powers things. She asked what it was powering. I said I wasn't sure yet. Maybe just the ongoing work of getting up in the morning and being alive and honest. Maybe that was enough for now. She said she thought it was enough. I looked at my wife, this woman who has been next to me for 38 years, who made pot roast the night her daughter came home, who shook off a triple dose of sedative and looked out the car window and said something true about grief in 4 words. I thought about the dock I built, how I know every bolt of it, how I know what it holds. I know what she holds too. She is not leaving me. I am not leaving her. Whatever comes next, we face it on our feet and clear-headed, which is more than some people ever manage. I'm closing this recording now. The sheriff's office has requested a formal statement this afternoon. Ray will be there. I will sit at a table and I will speak slowly and clearly, and I will tell them everything. I just told you. If this story reached you, I want you to hear this. There is no shame in having loved someone who turned out to be capable of this. The shame belongs entirely to them. Your love was not a failure. Your trust was not a weakness. What you did with what you knew in time, that is what matters. Pay attention to the drawer that isn't quite closed. Pay attention to the questions that are just a little too specific. Pay attention to the coffee that tastes wrong. And if the worst happens anyway, remember that I crawled out of a creek bed with a bad knee and a dead phone battery, and I walked back through the door. So can you. I have been sitting with this for 11 days now, and the thing I keep coming back to is not the dock, not the water, not even the coffee I almost finished. It's the drawer that wasn't closed all the way. I walked into my study and I saw it. A 1/4 inch of gap. That's all, and instead of telling myself I must have left it way, I took photographs and sent them to Ray. Not because I was certain something was wrong, because I respected what I felt. That is the difference between the man I was at 40 and the man I am at 63. At 40, I would have talked myself out of it. I would have called it paranoia. I would have chosen peace over truth, because peace is more comfortable in the short run. What Irene and Bernard did was the result of 100 small choices made over years. A choice to borrow money they couldn't repay, a choice to borrow more, a choice to stop thinking of Beverly and me as people and start thinking of us as a solution to a math problem. None of that happened overnight. It accumulated the way structural damage accumulates, quietly, invisibly, until the thing that looks solid from the outside comes apart all at once. The people who ended up in handcuffs on that porch didn't become who they were in the moment they put something in our coffee. They became that a long time ago, and nobody, including me, was paying close enough attention to the process. I am not saying I caused this. I want to be clear about that. But I have spent 31 years understanding that the engineer who signs off on a structure bears some responsibility for knowing what is inside it. I loved my daughter without requiring honesty from her. I accepted the warmth she performed without asking whether it was real. That is not weakness. That is love. But love without discernment is not wisdom, and I am old enough now to know the difference. What saved us was not luck. It was 31 years of habit. The habit of mapping a space before I entered it. The habit of reading the listing for the cabin. The habit of keeping a trusted attorney on file and sending him documents when something felt wrong, even when I couldn't name why. Intelligence is not just what you know, it is what you do with what you notice. I noticed 100 things about Irene in those 8 months, and I filed them away, and when the moment came, they were there waiting for me. And then there is Beverly. My wife drank that coffee and walked into whatever came and came out the other side and sat in the car on the way home and said 4 words about a pot roast that told me she understood everything that needed to be understood. That is not fragility. That is the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just holds. Owen is 12 years old and he doesn't know the full shape of this yet, but he will grow up with a trust in his name and a letter in a lawyer's drawer that tells him his grandparents thought of him in the worst hour of their lives. That is the legacy I am choosing, not bitterness, not a war with the wreckage, just the deliberate, unglamorous work of making sure the next generation inherits something better than what nearly destroyed us. What I want you to take from this is not fear. I want you to take attention, the coffee that tastes slightly wrong, the drawer that isn't closed all the way, the questions that are a little too specific. Pay attention to those things. Trust what you feel before you have the words for it. And if someone you love turns out to be capable of something you never imagined, know that their failure is not your fault. Your love was real. That is worth something even now, especially now.